My name is Richard Hirschout. I have the privilege of serving as Los Angeles Director of American Jewish Committee. AJC is one of America's premier legacy human rights organizations, founded by the Jewish community in 1906. We are a global organization with some 36 installations around the world and 25 regional offices around the United States. We've gathered at City Hall this morning and with great appreciation to Councilmember Bob Blumenfield for a special consultation. And gathered with me on the podium today are representatives of European governments and the European Commission who are charged specifically with the task of monitoring and creating responses to the scourge of global anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism that has reared its ugly head in Europe over the past 2 decades and increasingly found safe haven, much to our great chagrin and concern here in the United States. You may recall that the LA City Council on November 30th adopted what is known as the IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition on anti-Semitism, a framework for dealing with this age-old hate, but also as a way of building bridges and confronting all forms of hate and incivility and racism here in Los Angeles. We are among the most diverse cities in the nation, and we have to do better when it comes to fighting hate and fighting incivility. So we are here this morning. We've just concluded an hour and a half of very constructive and positive discussion with members of the City Council, with leadership from the Department of Civil Rights and Human Rights and Equity, and also with members of the City Attorney's Office and staff. And the whole purpose of our being here today is to help Los Angeles and to be a catalyst, if you will, for spurring good communication, coordination, and proactive strategies for dealing with hate in our city. We need look no further than the violence just 2 weeks ago in the Pico Robertson neighborhood of Los Angeles when 2 observant Jews, simply walking on the street following their morning prayers, were targeted by a gunman who thankfully is now in custody and who reflected what is this toxic and all too often lethal combination of mental illness, easy access to guns, and hate. It is a terrible, terrible combination that we must continue to work to push back against to build a better community and a better society. Without any further ado, I'd like to call upon my colleague, Rabbi Andrew Baker, who is American Jewish Committee's European representative and who has labored in these fields for many decades. We're delighted, Andy, to have you with us.
Rick, thank you. And let me give you just a little bit of context of the group that's here. I serve as AJC's Director of International Jewish Affairs, but I also hold the role as a special envoy, the personal representative of the chair of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, on combating anti-Semitism. This is a long fight, but particularly with the resurgence of anti-Semitism that we saw in Europe now 20 years ago, it led to considerable efforts, pressure from here in the United States and from elsewhere to push European governments to step forward. Jews were being attacked on the streets. We were seeing something that came to be called a new form of anti-Semitism in various places. Jews being attacked by people out of an animus toward Israel. The very fact that Jews could no longer feel safe and secure walking on the streets really led to the need for concerted and strong action. And some of those first steps led to international conferences, led to commitments to collect data to be able to understand the nature of hate crimes, bias-motivated crimes, and also to undertake educational programs, often Holocaust education, but also more than that. Critical in all of this was a recognition that unless we can define anti-Semitism, we're not going to be capable of really fighting it. And so at the same time, there were efforts to develop a clear and comprehensive definition of anti-Semitism that would be useful to police, to prosecutors, to judges, to civil society organizations. It had its origin already almost 20 years ago in the European Center on Monitoring Racism and Xenophobia, but later somewhat revised and adopted in 2016 by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and hence it is referred to as the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. That definition is one of the key pillars in addressing this problem, together with education, together with addressing security. More and more European nations have come forward, being urged by the European Commission to develop national strategies and action plans. And frankly, we have come to recognize that the problem that we once saw as a European problem, we know today is very much an American problem as well. And we look now to the Biden administration, which has stepped up and said there should be an American national strategy. It will develop some similar strategies referencing other forms of hatred, but as a first focus, it will be a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. And so we brought together some 6 envoys from around Europe and also in Latin America at the invitation of the administration, so these envoys could sit together with those in the White House, part of this interagency policy group that was created to share these practices. And I'm pleased to say that meeting took place only 2 days ago. What was to be a 1-hour meeting went on for about 2.5 hours. And I think it made clear we can very much learn from each other. That was the goal in coming here, but we recognize anti-Semitism, while it must be addressed nationally, plays out regionally and locally. And so this too was a critical part of our visit, not only to talk about this in Washington with the White House, with members of Congress, but to come here, the largest Jewish community in the U.S., to talk about what can be done on the ground. So we're so grateful to Rick, to our AJC colleagues here, to the Council for allowing us to come together. As I noted earlier, we started with 6 envoys. 2 of them have returned to Europe. 2 of them have accompanied my colleague to Miami, where similar meetings are taking place. But we've managed to secure the 2 best of all of these to be with us here in LA. And I want to turn to them now. First, Katerina von Schnurbein, who represents the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Andy, Rick, for having us. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to share with, as we just did, council members, the experience we have in Europe with regards to addressing anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is on the rise globally. We see a convergence, unfortunately, among the Jewish community, where according to the AJC survey, 9 out of 10 Jews regard anti-Semitism as a serious problem, and in our survey among 16,500 Jews in Europe, we saw exactly the same number of 9 out of 10 regarding anti-Semitism as the most serious problem in their lives. So this is the basis of why now I believe we have, for the first time in 2,000 years, a strategic and global approach to addressing anti-Semitism, to join forces in Europe, obviously, as we have done, but with our partners here in the United States, with other partner countries, also in Latin America, and on all the various levels. So the national level, the regional level, the city level, in order to change the situation for Jewish communities. The European Commission decided that it was necessary to step up our action against anti-Semitism, and in October 2021 we adopted the first ever EU strategy in combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. These two aspects go together. We need to fight anti-Semitism, we need to address it, we need to roll it back. That's the aim. In fact, it says in our strategy towards an end of anti-Semitism, and while we are not naive, we know that this has to be the end goal. And the other aspect is to foster Jewish life, to ensure that Jews see a future for themselves in Europe, but also that they can go about, and this is true for the Jewish community globally, in line, they can go about their lives in line with their cultural and religious traditions and free from fear. That means security, that means addressing above all also online anti-Semitism, which is the entry door for anti-Semitism and hate and polarization and conspiracy myths into our living rooms. There we need the responsibility of the platforms. We need prosecution, because what is, according to European hate speech legislation, illegal offline is also illegal online, and we need to strengthen also the users and those NGOs that address hate and anti-Semitism online. We need in particular, and this is very often responsibility of the states and in some cases also of the cities, where they can do a lot with regards to education and bringing coalitions between the different groups. This was one of the key discussion we had now between the council, city council members and those who were in the meeting, to see how can we forge solidarity between different groups. And for us at the European Commission, this is key. I work very closely with my colleagues that counter anti-racism and counter anti-Muslim hatred. And I believe this is something that we can share also with others. And it's very encouraging to see that a lot is happening already in LA, and there is a great willingness to step this up. All our plans across the 27 EU member states that are being developed now on national level against anti-Semitism are based on what Rabbi Baker referred to, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition on anti-Semitism. That's very important. You can't fight it if you can't define it. And what we see is that this definition reflects what the vast majority of Jews regards as anti-Semitic. And we want to ensure that, just like we do with any other group, we have a victims-based approach. We listen to the group concerned for what they tell us is anti-Semitism in their feelings. So that's that's an important basis. We need to have a starting point, but it cannot stop there. And it's very good to see that LA has adopted this definition. Now the second step will be to ensure training on the basis of this definition for teachers, for educational staff, for law enforcement authorities, to make sure that when there is an incident, the anti-Semitic bias can be recognized and the follow-up can be accordingly. I'm very pleased to be here, and I thank the City of LA for hosting us here, and the AGC. Thank you very much.
And representing the Netherlands and responsible for its national strategy and plan, Edo Verdone. Edo, please.
Thank you very much. Just like my colleague from the European Commission spoke about, anti-Semitism is a problem which has come back to haunt us. We in the Netherlands, we had this idea that it was over, that after the Second World War, people would have seen what anti-Semitism can do, and therefore they would never go back to those terrible, terrible ideas against Jews. but somehow either we've been sleeping or either we've been too tolerant or maybe too indifferent, I don't know, but it's come back to haunt us. And we need to step up. We see that those that were afraid to oust those anti-Semitic things before now are no longer afraid. They're able to say it on the internet, but they're also able to say it in newspapers. They're able to say it even sometimes in political positions. And this is very, very dangerous. This is a wake-up call to all of us. Because anti-Semitism is not something that harms only the Jewish community. In fact, in the Netherlands, the Jewish community has already been decimated to such an extent that the anti-Semitism that comes to this community, it affects this small part. But it affects also the larger idea of democracy. Democracy is based on the fact that everybody is equal, that there's an equality before the law of every single person. And only that equality can ensure that democracy is being sustained. Therefore, if you set one person back because of the fact that he's Jewish or because of any other reason, you're actually sawing at the paws of democracy. So that's a very important step. Now, we are here today because the United States has indicated that it wants to set up a national strategy against anti-Semitism. And it's important. It's important that it's a specific strategy, so not a generic one which deals with all kinds of hate, because every type of hate is just as bad. It doesn't matter whether it's hate against a Jew, hate against somebody for their skin color, hate against somebody for their beliefs. It doesn't matter, but the origin can be different. And therefore also the way to solve it, to attack it, can be different. And that's why we need a specific strategy for this type of hate as we would for other types of hate. And I'm very happy that the United States government is doing that. And we're here today because also here in LA, of course recently we've seen the attacks on Pico Robertson, and the City Council has made a statement to say, no, also here we're going to adapt the IRA definition and we're going to look into ideas to further strengthen our response as a municipality against anti-Semitism. And I was very happy to be able to share the ideas that we have in Europe. And we've been developing them over the past years because we've already had such a national strategy in some of our countries, and we've had that trickle down to our localities and municipalities. And I hope that these ideas will give some inspiration to people here in LA. Ideas like giving teachers support when they speak about the Holocaust or about Jewish life in classrooms, so that when they get questions on whether it actually happens or some conspiracy theory, they know how to answer. Ideas like giving people that commit a hate crime or that commit some anti-Semitic crime are able to get a course, not only a penalty, but also a course in what are Jews, what is anti-Semitism. Ideas like speaking at sports environments for kids and having them also not only remember what happened in the past in Europe, but also speak about tolerance and how every person is equal and Jewish life has a role just as any other life here in the US. These type of ideas, which can be implemented locally, should be done from a government perspective, from a municipality perspective. They should not be left only to the Jewish community to do. Because anti-Semitism is a problem of the whole society, and therefore the municipalities should step up, just as the national government is doing, to really step forward, protect its Jewish community, and help out here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edo. And representing Councilmember Blumenfield, John Popoch would like to say a few words, please.
Hi, John Popoch, Deputy Chief of Staff for Councilmember Bob Blumenfield. Just apologies from the council member who hosted the roundtable that our guests were just discussing. I bring it up, I just want to briefly mention that it was last fall, last November, that we adopted the IRA definition, and to the point that the envoys are making, we wanted to make sure that there was something that the government could do and step in and say, here's the working definition, and recognizing all forms of hate, but using the specific anti-Semitism definition with regards to the Jewish people. And we were very proud it was unanimously supported, and we had great support from our fellow council staff and council members and city attorney and mayor's office here today to listen to our envoys. And I want to just say thank you to the American Jewish Committee who we worked with to create this definition. My personal story quickly, 30 years ago, I remember fighting skinheads downtown where I grew up in Canada with my fists, and now here we are 30 years later still having a conversation about this kind of thing from all sides. That just happened to be my experience. So we want to make sure that we really have conversations that are hitting the heart of the people, the ones that are kind of doing the hate out there. We have the right people in the room, and now we have to educate the people who really need the education. So on behalf of Councilmember Blumenfield, I just want to say thank you as we kind of continue to lead the way, and appreciate our guests from the AJC being here. Thank you.
We are happy to entertain any questions or comments that you may wish to pose. Yes, please.
Two questions. One, I'm just curious about the timing of this gathering. Was this something that had been planned a while back, and it was just a coincidence that the recent shooting happened when it did, or was this a direct response to that? Secondly, perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on what was discussed during that roundtable, or during the
Certainly. Let me touch base, maybe a two-part answer on the timing, but maybe Andy, if you would like to.
I'll speak to the timing.
Touch to the.
Because the timing of this visit here was clearly connected to our meetings in Washington. And those meetings in Washington, I have to say, we thought already back in the late fall, early winter, there would be something useful. But at the time, the administration had not yet said it was going to develop a national strategy. In fact, initially, it had organized a summit against hate, but it was a much more generalized focus. We and others were saying, this is very good, but you ought to speak also to Jewish leaders to hear from them about the special aspects of anti-Semitism, which that administration did. And following that, it decided that it would appoint this interagency policy task force to create a national strategy, and that first strategy would be about anti-Semitism. So I've sometimes said at one point I felt like I was the matchmaker, but I didn't really have the bride or the groom lined up, just the idea of it. But we were able to persuade these envoys to come from Europe to Washington, and of course to persuade the administration of the value of having that meeting. So we're very pleased it could take place. As I said, having been there, we knew always we wanted to go to LA as well, to a couple of other cities. So the timing specifically was to follow that visit, but we're glad we could obviously be here as well.
Thank you, Rabbi. I would just add also, there is even an LA dimension to the national conversation as well. It was spearheaded by the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, from Los Angeles, of course, who has made it a personal mission to be a voice of the administration as one of the four principles, as it were, on issues of anti-Semitism and hate. And this has been an evolving and essential portfolio for the second gentleman. There's also an LA connection with the U.S. Special Envoy on anti-Semitism, Professor Deborah Lipstadt, who spent many years in Los Angeles before becoming a distinguished member of the faculty at Emory University. And the role of the Special Envoy, which actually is now elevated to an ambassadorial position, and Ambassador Lipstadt received Senate confirmation because of the elevation of her role. It's a little bit of an outside-inside role now as well. The consultations that took place at the White House 2 days ago involved senior administration staff, but also representatives of the special envoys and special ambassadors office of the U.S. Department of State. And so that is, I think, part of the nexus and part of the coalition, if you will, to try and arrest this scourge. To the second part of your question, the discussions were really an opportunity for the newly constituted or recently constituted members of the council, because there were representatives who were not privy to, did not have an opportunity to be part of the unanimous adoption on November 30th. but to be brought in to the discussion of how do we create an interagency capacity and ability to respond to these issues of hate. And so, in addition to the council members, as John mentioned, we had representatives of the city attorney's office. We had the Department of Civil and Human Rights and Equity, and of course, representatives were grateful from Mayor Bass's office. And there was discussion about the prevalence of mental health issues and the need to recognize that when we talk about hate, all too often there is a dimension that relates to mental health. There's a dimension as well that relates to the easy access to guns and to weapons upon which someone with particular social pathologies can indeed act out their hatred. And we have to find ways to bring law enforcement. Sheriff Luna is newer to his position and is approaching the subject of hate with fresh eyes and open to new perspectives. Of course, Chief Moore has been a stalwart in the issues of confronting hate. We did not have law enforcement in the discussion today, but this was a beginning. And this was the first of many conversations that we know will be, that will bring together members of the council with all of the other agencies within the city. Because fundamentally, it's also about not allowing a potential perpetrator of a hate crime to slip through the cracks. And that's something that, in fact, seems to have taken place with the perpetrator who is now in custody, thankfully, and could do no more harm of the shootings in Pico Robertson just 2 weeks ago. So that is a lesson that looms large for us, and I think that was very fundamental to the conversation this morning with the elected officials.
Just one thing to add to your second question, sorry, is because I wanted to bring it to the local level. I mean, as you know, Councilmember Blumenfield, he led, as Rick said, from AJC. We had a unanimous vote. We have a new administration. We have new council members. But as you see here, we have people from Europe, and then we have people from D.C. We wanted to try and make this relevant to the local level. Not just on paper adopt an anti-Semitism definition and not really do anything about it. So that was kind of part of the impetus for having a conversation like this today. So two of the things we want to try and do, at least two that came from it, because I know there's going to be follow-up discussions, was, there's these Embrace LA dinners that Councilwoman Heather Hutt brought up. Those are great tools to have these conversations. What we're trying to figure out is how do we bring in people that really need those conversations, not the people that are already, know and like the people in this room and are on the same. So we're going to try and look at a way, and that might be where we lead to the second idea, which was forced education, which is what Edo brought up about some of this behavior at soccer stadiums in Europe. If we see this kind of anti-Semitism behavior here, which even if that definition isn't necessarily illegal, makes things illegal, we could actually, though, do something as a forced education to people who are found doing that, who maybe did something illegal and got kicked out of a sporting event, for example, and then they have to have this forced education, and that's where we could tie it to these kinds of conversations. But those are two of the kind of ideas that we're working on. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we thank you all very much for your time, for being with us this morning. Thank you.